Hello and welcome to part 3 of the stone well videos. In the first episode I created a high detail mesh. In the second episode I created a low poly version of the same mesh, and in this episode I will be finishing up a bit of the geometry on the low poly, a few things that I noticed I missed last time, and I will be UV unwrapping the mesh so that I can texture it. I will then be taking it into Substance Painter, where I will bake the normals from the high poly mesh onto the onto the low poly mesh, the lolly poly, and texturing the model. Okay, so let's get into this. Okay, so I have the low poly mesh right here in front of me. I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to make sure I've got my screen cap keys turned on, just in case, so you can see what keys I'm using down here. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this edge here by pressing 2 and Alt left clicking the edge loop just here, pressing X for the delete function, and delete the vertices because we don't need that extra geometry there. I'm then going to select this edge just here, and if you look up here I've got clipping on edge mode, snapping, sorry, not clipping, on edge mode. So if I press G and Z, so that I can only move it in the Z axis, and then I bring the cursor over to this line here and press the control button, it will snap it to the edge just to bring it in line there. Another thing I noticed was this edge here, I need a bevel on there just to sharpen it up, and there's a few faces that I just don't need, so I'm going to go into face mode. If you see, you're never going to see these faces at the bottom, so I will select that. I'm going to press Control and plus on the numpad to bring it up, the selection, and I'm going to X and F to delete them faces, and repeat the same on the other side. X, F. Okay, so we'll never see them faces, so there's absolutely no point in having them. Again, up here, if I just press L over this piece and hide it, you'll see that I've got faces in here. Again, I don't need these faces at the top here or along the edge here, so if I click that, shift, a quicker way of doing that would be to shift click that and then control click to there. Now, press Control plus to increase the selection and delete them faces, and we'll do the same on these two here. Control plus and delete them faces. If I press Alt H, it brings back the selection. And where else was there? Oh yes, if I press this one, if I select this one with the L and select this one with the L, and then this one and this one with the L, and press H to hide, you'll see I've got end caps on these which I don't need, so select the end cap on each of these. Okay, and we'll press Control Plus to increase the selection and just delete them. On page, as you can see, you can't see them parts, so there's no point having geometry in them parts. It's just extra polygons and extra texture space. Okay, so now we'll start with the unwrapping. First things first, I'm going to take all of the in object mode by pressing tab. I'm going to select all of these and make sure that the light yellow outline is on the main part of the body, and press Ctrl J, and that joins all the geometry into one piece. Right, we're going to start with the base, unwrapping the base. So first things first, I'm going to hover over the base and press L to select it. That selects the whole of the base. If I press Ctrl and I, that inverts the selection, and I can hide all of that so I can see this better. Now a cylinder is, especially a hollow cylinder, is a pain because you get warping on the UV, so you've got to unwrap it in a way that it will create as less stretching and warping as possible. So generally what I'll do, because this side and this side, because this side, just hide these bits here, I didn't see them, just hide them, for some reason they didn't get caught in the selection. Okay, so because this side and this side will be covered by the posts going up, it's safe to put a seam on the edge by pressing 2 and then clicking this loop and clicking this loop. This means the seam, the edge loops here that I've highlighted, when I put a seam on them, they'll be covered up by the posts, so you won't see the seam. So once they're selected, press Ctrl and E and mark seam. That highlights the line in red. What this now means is, if I go into face mode and I press L over there, it will only select that part. And when I unwrap the model, it will separate the model at these lines, and it will flatten out all the faces in a 2D map. If you don't have the scenes, it won't flatten out properly. And again, I'm going to go through these, and I think back into edge mode around here. Around here, and again here, we should be able to put a edge loop in there. Now this should theoretically, once I go into UV editing, it's actually called UVW space, but everyone calls it UV. And I select the whole of the model there, I can press U and unwrap, and it will give us a fairly decent unwrap. This is a little bit curved, but we will sort that out in a moment. So yeah, that looks good so far. So let's sort out this curved mesh, and this is very simple to do. If you Alt left click on an edge and press SX and 0, that straightens the edge out there. So SX 0 straightens the edge out. And we just go through each of these. It's a long process, but it's worth doing because it avoids stretching and warping on the UVs. Very slow process this. I'm actually only going to do these pieces because these pieces are the main visible piece. curved UVs like this aren't that big an issue in Substance Painter because because you can use triplanar projection, so it will take into account the warping of the UVs. So it's only on large spaces that are really visible that you really need to straighten the UVs out. I mean, a lot of people don't actually even bother doing that, but this is just something I do because I find it gets a little bit better result. And again, we need to do the horizontals, so we're going to S to scale, and on the y-axis at 0. If I just go into H mode, that should be quicker that way. SY 0. Nearly there. And so this is a bit of a laborious process, and to be quite honest, when you're using things like Substance Painter, because it uses you can set it to use triplanar projection, it doesn't really matter because it then warps the actual texture to accommodate the UVs. I just like to do this just to keep it neat, and it's easier to fit things on the UV map if they're straight like this. Not essential, but it's a good step to do. Okay, let's press Control Shift to go back into the full mode, and that will be fine for the base. So we're going to unselect that, and now we can go Alt and hide to bring everything back. If I press Control I and then hide the base. Okay, so let's have a look. I think I'm going to do the roof next. So looking at the roof, I'm going to do this very basically, very simply. I'm going to edge select round that loop, edge select round that loop, and press Control E and mark seams, and then find an inside edge out of the way, out of sight, press Control E and mark seam. Now I can select all of that, press U and unwrap, and you see it's nice and neat. I'm going to hide that now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same for each of these slats on here. So select the outer edge loops. Whoops. That one. That one. And then on the other side the same. Control E, mark seam, that's all the ends done. So now if I just go no, I'm going to have to do this one by one. So from underneath, if I click and Control click to there, and then Shift click there, and Shift Control click to there, Shift click there, Shift Control click to there, Shift click there, Shift Control click there, and you get the idea. I don't have to keep saying that. I don't really need to do that edge, but it doesn't hurt. Oops. keep hitting that space bar, which turns on my animator. Doesn't make any difference to anything, but can be annoying. And Control E, mark seams. So now if I press L over all of these, and press U and unwrap, and that looks quite nice. I'm going to press Control Space to isolate this mode, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of the UV maps that are horizontal. I'm just going to go R90. I'm going to leave them like that for now. Doesn't matter where they're laid out right now, because what I do once I've unwrapped each of the individual parts, I can then go back into the UV map, select everything. I can average the island scale so that they're all on the right scale, and then I can pack them into the area needed. So I will hide that away. And likewise on these, it's exactly the same. Find an edge that's not so visible. Sometimes there's no way of knowing where it's going to be visible or not, but and mark seams. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and press U and unwrap. And as you can see, it's all come out. Oh, this one's missing. This one's not quite worked out. So why is that not quite worked out? Let's have a look-see. I don't know where that is. Okay, what I can do is I can press this little button here and it will synchronise the mesh. So now I can clear that. If I put it into face mode and press L on there, that will show me which face is which. Though it looks like to me, if I hide this piece, no, that's fine. That's baffling. Where is that? I see. It appears at some stage when I've done the mirror or duplicating, I've got Z clashing there, which means there's geometry on top of geometry there. So now if I press the M button and merge by distance, you'll know, no, that doesn't seem to make sense. I see. Right. What's happened is I have forgotten to delete. If I go into there and highlight there, get into clipping range there, this piece here, I didn't plus on that. I should have plussed. This edge, no, this edge, this edge. Yes, XF. Right, now if I do this, I'm going to turn off synchronization, press U and U again, and they're perfect. Okay, let's hide these. I'm going to do that middle bar now, so if I take this edge loop here, and this edge here, press mark seam, and then underneath mark seam, I should be able to select that, press unwrap. Why is that not unwrapping? Because there's a join in the middle, and just take that one, Control E mark seam, there There we go, perfect. Hide that. Why is that still? And then again on this piece, just choose one of the edges there, mark seam. Oops, no, undo that. It should be on edge mode. Choose one of the edges and mark seam. And then unwrap and hide that. Now this piece is just going to be a very basic unwrap. I'm not going to do much with this because it's going to have quite a messy texture, a rope texture on it. So it, in fact, I'm going to actually dissolve these edge loops and let the normals do the work. I think that will work better. That will give me a better unwrap and a clearer texture. Because if you remember on the high poly model, these are all high poly along here. So if I press X and then dissolve edges, I'll flatten that out. So now all I have to do is select that loop, and a loop on the bottom, and mark seams, and unwrap. Right. And then we have to go along these. Now these are going to be a metal material. Metal material is going to be mostly just colour. There's not going to be a huge amount of texture in it. So unwrapping these isn't going to be going to need to be ultra neat like everything else, but I do like to do it properly. So if I press that edge loop, that edge loop, and this edge loop, and this edge loop, and this edge loop, and this edge loop, press Ctrl E and mark seams, I can then select that edge loop, press Ctrl E and mark seams, and if I select that, and there we go, that should be fine. In fact, I'm going to leave that as it is, it should be fine. And we'll do the same here. So there. Now this is where it gets tricky because that's in the way, so I'm just going to quickly mark them seams. And what I will do is we'll get that seam there, one at the back, and that seam there. Mark that seam, select it all and unwrap, hide that away. So now I can see inside this, and I'm going to select these parts here. Seams, and then again on the bottom we'll put this part here. And unwrap that. That's good enough. And the last piece of the puzzle is right here. We'll do a seam on the end there, mark seam. A seam on the bottom, mark seam, you unwrap. Okay, now what I'll do is press Ctrl H to bring back the whole model. Select all the model. As you see, it's a bit of a mess here, it's all overlaid with each other. This doesn't matter. All I have to do is press A to select everything. If I go up to the menu here and select UV, I can come all the way down to average island cell. Now that brings all the scale of each of the islands up to an average of the whole model, so that it's all at the same scale. So every piece of the UV is using the right amount of space. So now all I have to do is bring this down and press pack islands. Now you notice it rotates some islands. Earlier on I specifically rotated a few islands so they were all horizontal, which makes it easier to actually paint in Substance Painter, because then you don't have to keep creating a material for each rotation. I'm just going to double check some of these. This and this, I can put them to 90 degrees, and that's fine, that's fine. And I seem to have here, this is why, when I've selected these in edge mode, it's also selected these. So just click out of that and clear that. L, 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 L. 90. And I think that is everything. So now what I can do is I can hit the pack button, and then down here we've got this little pop-up menu. Turn off the rotate and it will rotate it. Now I need a bit more iron space. It needs to be a little bit neater. I'm going to change that to 3, and you can scroll up and down on this and change it, and it does a pretty good job. Blender's actually pretty good for UV unwrapping. It's not perfect, but it is, for the sake of this video, it's good enough for the sake of this video. There we go. Ooh, nearly. It's good enough for the sake of this video to give you an example. Obviously you would normally adjust these UVs and rotate things, and so that it make maximum usage of the space. For example, I could move some of these pieces into here because there's a lot of space, extra space here. Some of these pieces into here to make more use of the spaces. But for the sake of this video, this will be good enough. Okay, so we now have this unwrapped. So before I go anywhere, I'm going to rename this as Stone Well Low, and bring back my cube. I've actually got the high poly module there. I've actually got something already named Stonewall High, so I'm just gonna change that because it won't allow you to have two items the same name. I did some tests earlier on, so we'll take the cube, which is the high poly, and we will call that Stonewall High. Okay, bring back our Stonewall Low and make sure that is selected. We need to add a material, and this material doesn't have to have anything on it, just needs a material slot, and we'll rename it Stone Well. And now we are ready for exporting. Before exporting, first thing I'm going to do is press the N button. I'm going to make sure the scale is at 1, the rotations and the locations are all at 0. And I will export FBX, and I will put that on my desktop, and I will create a folder. We will call that Stone Well, and I'll just click selected objects so that it only exports what you have selected. Mesh, so it only selects the mesh, and I always switch to FBX unit scale and apply transforms. That's mainly for when you bring it into game engines, but I automatically do that on an export anyway. And then we will call it Stone_Well and export FBX. So now if I hide that away, we select the stone well high poly, and we will export FBX. All the options will be the same, except in the name field I will add underscore high to that to denote that it's the high poly model, and then exit that. Now with that done, I can now move over to Substance Painter. Okay, that's not worked. Wrong button. My apologies. Boom, there we go. Substance Painter. For those not familiar with Substance Painter, this is a PBR painting program. You import models into it and you paint directly onto the mesh, and then you can export the textures for use in game engines, modeling programs, etc. So the first thing first, in File, New, select the template. I'm going for a PBR metallic roughness, which is what Blender uses. Yep. I'm going to document resolution. I'm going to switch that to 2048. I always do my textures in 2048 unless it's a really big model, then I'll go 4K. But 2048, I will do most of my models in 2048, and if it is a smaller model, I can then reduce that texture in a paint program. It's easier to reduce a texture than it is to increase the size of a texture. If you reduce a texture, you keep a lot of the detail, but if you increase the size of a texture, you get stretch, pixelation and warping on it. Normal map format. In this case, I will be switching to OpenGL because OpenGL is what Blender uses for its normals. I think Unity also uses OpenGL, and I think, but I'm not sure, Unreal uses DirectX and Game Guru uses DirectX. So obviously remember that when you're first setting up your model. It doesn't really matter because you can actually change the export presets and switch to an OpenGL or a DirectX, but it's easier to get it from the beginning. Okay, we'll go up to here to select, and we'll select, and as you can see, documents, desktop, Stonewell, and there's my Stonewell model. And click OK, and then just wait for it to process. And there's our low poly stone model in the viewport there. Just an explanation of the viewports. We have UV editing, UV layout there. That shows your UV map. And then here is the 3D port. Down here is your shelf, and this contains all your materials, smart materials, brushes, filters, and so on. To the right, at the top, you will find everything to do with layers and your texture sets, and below that the properties of the items that you've selected. So for example, at the moment this layer is selected and it gives me brush size, flow, stroke opacity, and so on. Okay, we're going to get rid of that layer. We don't need the default layer, and just make sure we've got one material set, texture set there called Stonewell. Go into texture settings. I always press the plus button here and add the ambient occlusion. Okay, and then we can go down and we can bake the mesh maps. Now what this does is this creates a base set of mesh maps for the object, texture maps for the object, normal, world space, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, thickness, and this is what Substance Painter uses to determine where the textures are going on the model. So I can turn off ID because we don't need that. I'm going to switch that to 2048, and because I'm going to use a high poly mesh as the normals, I'm going to click this little button here and I'm going to select Stonewall High FBX. Now this part here, max frontal distance, max rear distance, this adjusts the distance it detects the normal directions on the map for putting it into a normal map. So it's how far it's hard to explain. It will adjust the distance that your low poly mesh scales to the high poly mesh, so it can detect the details between the two meshes. It's a bit hit and miss. You have to experiment with this. You might have to bake 2 or 3 times just to get it right. But I'll just leave it at the default for now, and we will see how that goes. Let's click bake selected, and of course it's now going through all the different maps, creating the different maps from the high poly map. And this, depending on your machine, can take some time, and depending on how size your text resolution. But you can now see we now have all of the detail from the high poly map, and this is still the low poly model. The model hasn't changed. It's just created a normal map. Normal map. A normal map, which is overlaid onto the model to give it the appearance of geometry. Now let's have a look at some of these fine details. Let's have a look. That's done a little. That's a tiny little bit there and a little bit there. Now I could get rid of those marks there, that bit of geometry there. Oops, press F to focus, bring that back in, I got lost there. Just there, you can see on the edge where it's not sure how the normals work. You can go back in and rebake and adjust them sliders, but you're probably it'd probably be fine to leave it. It's only a tiny little bit, and to be quite fair, the textures will cover it up. Okay. Now I'm just noticing that we've gone into nearly 40 minutes here, and I've only just baked the textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish the video here. I don't want to leave it going for too long, it will take forever to upload. So I'm going to leave it here. We've baked the normal maps onto the well, and I'm going to create a part 4 where I do the actual texturing. Okay, thank you very much for watching. If you like the content and want to see more, please remember to hit that like, subscribe and ring the bell. Thank you very much for watching.